Hey there. So, we are going to read chapter 9 in Night today, the final chapter of the book. As you probably remember, in the previous chapter, Ellie was fighting with his father, trying to keep his father alive. His father was terribly, terribly ill. And then eventually, one of the leaders hit his father in the head. And when Ellie woke up the next morning, his father was simply gone. So, Um, now we get to Liberation, but it's not a big happy ending as you might expect. It's kind of melancholy. So let's go ahead and read it. It's pretty short, and then we'll be done. So I remained in Buchenwald until April 11th. I shall not describe my life during that period. It no longer mattered. Since my father's death, nothing mattered to me anymore. I was transferred to the children's block, where there were 600 of us. The front was coming closer. I spent my days in total idleness, with only one desire: to eat. I no longer thought of my father or my mother. From time to time I would dream, but only about soup, an extra ration of soup. On April 5th, the wheel of history turned. It was late afternoon. We were standing inside the block, waiting for an SS to come and count us. He was late. Such lateness was unprecedented in the history of Buchenwald. Something must have happened. 2 hours later, the loudspeakers transmitted an order from the commandant. All Jews were to gather in the Appelplatz. This was the end. Hitler was about to keep his promise. The children of our block did as ordered. There was no choice. Gustav, the block Alteste, made it clear with his club. But on our way, we met some prisoners who whispered to us, "Go back to your block. The Germans plan to shoot you. Go back and don't move." We returned to the block. On our way there, we learned that the underground resistance of the camp had made the decision not to abandon the Jews and to prevent their liquidation. As it was getting late and the confusion was great, countless Jews had been passing as non-Jews, and Lager Alteste had decided that a general roll call would take place the next day. Everybody would have to be present. The roll call took place. The Lager commandant announced that the Buchenwald camp would be liquidated. 10 blocks of inmates would be evacuated every day. From that moment on, there was no further distribution of bread and soup. The evacuation began. Every day, a few thousand inmates passed the camp's gate and did not return. On April 10, there were still some 20,000 prisoners in the camp, among them a few hundred children. It was decided to evacuate all of us at once, by evening. Afterward, they would blow up the camp. So we were herded onto the huge Appelplatz in ranks of 5, waiting for the gate to open. Suddenly, the sirens began to scream, "Alert!" We went back to the blocks. It was too late to evacuate us that evening. The evacuation was postponed to the next day. Hunger was tormenting us. We had not eaten for nearly 6 days, and except for a few stalks of grass and some potato peels found on the grounds of the kitchens. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the SS took positions throughout the camp and began to herd the last of us toward the Appelplatz. The resistance movement decided at that point to act. Armed men appeared from everywhere. Bursts of gunshots, grenades exploding. We, the children, remained flat on the floor of the block. The battle did not last long. Around noon, everything was calm again. The SS had fled and the resistance had taken charge of the camp. At 6 o'clock that afternoon, the first American tank stood at the gates of Buchenwald. Our first act as free men was to throw ourselves onto the provisions. That's all we thought about. No thought of revenge or of parents, only of bread. And even when we were no longer hungry, not one of us thought of revenge. The next day, a few of the young men ran into Weimar to bring back some potatoes and clothes, and to sleep with the girls. But still no trace of revenge. 3 days after the liberation of Buchenwald, I became very ill, some form of food poisoning. I was transferred to a hospital and spent 2 weeks between life and death. One day, when I was able to get up, I decided to look at myself in the mirror on the opposite wall. I had not seen myself since the ghetto. From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. The look in his eyes as he gazed after me has never left me. So, as I said, a short chapter. Kind of the big news is, of course, that uh, liberation came, and all of the Jews that were still alive at that point were able to have their freedom. So, the timeline of the chapter 9, the timeline of the book, let's just clarify this a little bit. The first paragraph says it was April 11th, but then it kind of jumps back a little bit to April 5th and then to April 10th. And so basically, he's saying not a lot of interesting thing happens between January, right, when kind of the last chapter 8 ended, okay, and then April here. So he just said, my father was dead, and I just thought only of eating and surviving. So I like this phrase, the wheel of history turned, for his life, for his historical experience. The wheel of history turned. We use that phrase kind of talk about major momentous historical events. For example, when there's a new inauguration for a president, as is happening today, the wheel of history turns. Major changes happen. So, yeah, so his life radically changed on that day as they started to kind of fight back against a few remaining German soldiers, as the war was clearly being lost by Germany, as the Americans were making their way into the country. Things were clearly over for them. So, and then April 10th, the resistance. This is, kind of some of the prisoners that were there. They decided enough is enough. They might have been able to get some guns, some weapons. I don't. It doesn't go into detail here, but they were able to fight back. The battle did not last long. The SS had run away. They saw the end was coming. They knew the Americans were hot on their heels. You know what? Let's just get out of here. And so that's what happened. Excuse me. In my copy, it says a corpse gazed back at me. In this PDF copy, let's see, how does it end? It says, from the depths of the mirror, a corpse was contemplating me. Basically, this. He's looking at the mirror. He does not actually see a corpse, but when he looks at his face, it looks almost like it's dead. He doesn't even recognize himself. And again, he was what, 15 years old at this time? 16 maybe? So when you look in the mirror and you contemplate your own reflection, think about the trauma and the tragedy that Ellie experienced. All right, so that pretty much sums it up. I'm going to spend just a moment just kind of talking in general about the story. So on one hand, we learn Ellie's experiences, right? This is his memoir. It's his book. And it's horrible and terrifying and tragic and heartbreaking. It's also not unlike the story of millions and millions of other Jews, many of whom did not make it. Some did. But by reading his story, we have a better understanding of everyone who went through that. We can supplement our knowledge by reading other books. Things like Anne Frank is another popular book out there that you could read. But there's lots of really good movies that you could watch that kind of help fill in some of these holes in our understanding of things. So, number one, when we say never forget, when we talk about the Holocaust and we say never forget, it's because the disgusting, horrific tragedy of it on such a massive scale was something that we should never again see in humanity. And yet, when we look around the world, there are still such evil dictators. There are still such evil political regimes. There are still people who are put in concentration camps. There are still people who are tormented in similar ways. And what was briefly mentioned in a talk that we did the other day, the United States has its own flawed thing during World War II when we put the Japanese into internment camps. It was not nearly as bad as this. It was bad, but we weren't killing the Japanese. We simply put entire families, an entire ethnic group into prison for no reason other than their ethnicity. People who were born and raised in the United States, most of them in California. But so when we say never forget, it's to try and hold back that worst part of us and to remember the terror that we can cause. We've studied all the inhumanity throughout this book. And your life is important, and your voice is important, and your ability to remember for them, and your ability to tell your future children, and to share these stories so hopefully we can have a more peaceful world. So hopefully we can have a much more loving and blessed existence. So anyway, yes, I know it's sad and depressing, and you might be wondering, why do we have to read such a sad and depressing book filled with death? Well, let it be a warning to us that evil is ever present. It's always knocking at the door wanting to get in. And we are always at risk of falling into that. So anyway, I think that just about sums it up for now. So congratulations. We have finished yet another book this year, which is quite the accomplishment. So thanks for sticking with me. Proud of you guys. And we will talk again soon.